Hello, my friend. Welcome to this special moment that I've prepared for you. Today, I want to talk about something that has, at some point, deeply touched the heart of every human being on this planet. Something that may, at this very moment, be causing pain in your own heart. I want to talk about suffering. More specifically, I want to address that question that, whether whispered or shouted, has left your lips in moments of despair. Why, God? Why do you allow this to happen? This question is as old as humanity itself, a question that echoes through the centuries, from Job to the present day. And honestly, if you've received answers that didn't satisfy your heart, that didn't bring peace to your spirit, don't feel guilty. Because the truth is that many of the explanations we hear about human suffering, even from the most well-intentioned people, don't capture the depth of the answer that the Bible really offers. Let me share something with you. Over the last decade, I've dedicated myself to studying biblical passages about suffering that are rarely mentioned in Sunday sermons. I've talked with people who have gone through unimaginable pain and found a peace that transcends all understanding. And what I've discovered, what I want to share with you today, may completely change your perspective on the pain in your life. I don't promise to eliminate your suffering with magic words. I won't offer simplistic formulas or verses disconnected from reality. What I offer is a profound biblical perspective that can transform the meaning of your pain and, perhaps more importantly, transform you in the process. Before we dive into this journey together, I want you to meet Sarah Williams, a 42-year-old teacher from Minneapolis. Sarah grew up in a Christian home, faithfully attended church, and sincerely believed in God's promises. Her faith was strong, unshakable, at least that's what she thought. In 2019, Sarah was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. "It was like the ground disappeared from beneath my feet," she told me. "One day I was planning summer vacation with my husband and our 2 children. The next, I was choosing an oncologist." The months that followed were a brutal test of her faith. Chemotherapy devastated her body. Medical costs shook her finances. Constant fear affected her marriage. And in her darkest moments, Sarah questioned, "Why, God? I did everything right. I followed your commandments. I taught my children to love you. Why do you allow this suffering?" The answers she received only worsened her anguish. "It's a test to strengthen your faith," said one friend. "God is punishing some sin in your life," whispered another. "You need more faith to be healed," suggested a third. Each of these answers only added additional weight on her already overburdened shoulders. Guilt, confusion, despair. Perhaps you, like Sarah, have heard explanations that, instead of bringing comfort, only intensified your pain. Explanations that, although well-intentioned, seem to transform God into a cruel or indifferent being, or that place the weight of guilt on your already fragile shoulders. I also want you to meet Michael Torres, a 37-year-old businessman from Phoenix. After 15 years building a technology company, Michael saw everything crumble during the pandemic. In a matter of months, he lost his company, his home, and his savings. His wife, unable to handle the financial stress, asked for a divorce. "I prayed every night," Michael told me, with tears in his eyes. "I begged God for a miracle, for some sign that he was listening. But the silence was deafening." In his Bible study group, Michael heard that God has a better plan, or that when one door closes, another opens. But these cliches sounded hollow in the face of the magnitude of his loss. And there's also Emma Chen, a 23-year-old who lost her younger brother to suicide. "People at church didn't know what to say," she shared. "So they would say that he's in a better place, or that God needed another angel in heaven, as if that could fill the emptiness I feel every day." Sarah, Michael, Emma, 3 different stories of suffering. 3 people who loved God, who tried to live according to his will. 3 broken hearts that couldn't find comfort in traditional answers about suffering. And perhaps you, my friend, are identifying with one of these stories right now. Perhaps you're going through your own storm, an illness, a divorce, a loss, a financial or emotional crisis, and the explanations you've been receiving simply don't bring peace to your heart. Well, I want you to know that you're not alone. And more importantly, I want you to know that there is an answer in the Bible that few share, a perspective that can transform not only your understanding of suffering, but your own journey through it. Before revealing this perspective, let's briefly examine the most common explanations about suffering and why they often leave more questions than answers. The first explanation we usually hear is that suffering is a test or proof of our faith. This idea is based on passages like James chapter 1, verses 2 to 4, which says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." There is truth in this passage, certainly. But when it's applied insensitively and generically to situations of extreme suffering, it can make God seem like a cruel manipulator, deliberately inflicting pain to test our loyalty, as if he didn't already know our hearts. The second common explanation is that suffering is a direct consequence of sin, whether personal or collective. This view is based on Old Testament passages that show God sending judgments on the people of Israel when they turned away from him. Again, there are elements of truth here. Our choices have consequences. But Jesus himself refuted the idea that all suffering is a direct result of sin. In John chapter 9, when the disciples asked about a man born blind, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus clearly answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him." The third frequent explanation is that we simply cannot understand God's ways. Passages like Isaiah chapter 55, verse 8 are quoted, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." This answer contains profound wisdom. There really are aspects of God's plans that are beyond our understanding. But when used as a complete answer to suffering, it can portray God as distant and indifferent, leaving the suffering person with an even greater emptiness. These traditional explanations contain fragments of truth, but none of them captures the complete answer that the Bible offers about human suffering. None of them adequately resolves the tension between a loving God and a world full of pain. So, what is this different perspective that I promised to share? What is the answer that nobody told you? It's in one of the most powerful, yet frequently misinterpreted passages of the Bible, Romans chapter 8, verses 18 to 25. I'll share these verses with you, and I ask that you listen to them with new ears, as if it were the first time. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. In this revolutionary passage, Paul presents a vision of suffering that we rarely hear in Sunday sermons. He doesn't say that suffering is a divine test or a punishment for sin or an incomprehensible mystery. Instead, he reveals something deeply transformative. Suffering is part of a universal creative process of birthing something new. Paul uses the metaphor of a woman in labor. All of creation, including us, is groaning as in the pains of childbirth. And what is being born? the children of God to be revealed, a new form of existence, a transformed creation. This is the answer that nobody told you. Your suffering is not punishment. It's not an arbitrary test. It's not even primarily about you as an individual. Your suffering is part of a universal process of transformation. Birth pains that announce the birth of something entirely new. Think about the birthing process for a moment. Labor pains are intense, sometimes seemingly unbearable. But they have a clear purpose, to bring a new life into the world. And when the baby is born, the mother rarely focuses on the pain she felt. Her focus is on the new life in her arms. Similarly, Paul is saying that our current suffering, however intense and inexplicable it may seem, is part of a cosmic birthing process. Through it, something new is emerging, not just in us as individuals, but in all of creation. This perspective changes everything. Instead of seeing suffering as a punishment to be feared or a test to be endured, we can begin to see it as a creative process to be gone through. Painful, yes, but with a defined purpose: transformation. And this leads us to another frequently ignored passage about suffering in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 to 18, where Paul writes, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes, not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." Again, Paul is not talking about suffering as punishment or test. He's talking about suffering as a process of transformation, being renewed day by day and achieving for us an eternal glory. This understanding of suffering as a process of transformation and birth is deeply consistent with the central story of Christianity, the death and resurrection of Jesus. On the cross, Jesus experienced suffering in its most extreme form. But that suffering wasn't the end of the story. It was the necessary prelude to resurrection and an entirely new reality. And it's here that we find the deepest answer to the question, why does God allow suffering? Not because he is cruel or indifferent, not because he's testing or punishing us, but because he is engaged in a creative process of transformation, both in us individually and in all of creation. As renowned theologian N.T. Wright writes in his book, Evil and the Justice of God, suffering is not given to us so that we can eventually look back and say, "Now I understand why that was necessary." Instead, it is given to us so that, when we look back, we can say, "I see what kind of person I have become through this." And that is what matters. Now I want to show how this perspective transformed the lives of Sarah, Michael, and Emma, those three people whose stories I shared earlier. Sarah, the teacher with cancer, found this perspective during her treatment through a support group led by a hospital chaplain. "He shared this idea of birth pains with me," she said, "and something immediately changed. I stopped asking, 'Why is this happening to me?' and started asking, 'What is being born through this suffering?'" This change in perspective didn't eliminate the physical pain or fear, but it gave Sarah a new context for her suffering. "I began to see my journey with cancer as a creative process," she explained. "It was hurting terribly, but something new was being born, a new me, a new understanding of life, a new ability to connect with others in their suffering." Today, 3 years later, Sarah is in remission. She left her previous job and now works as a counselor for newly diagnosed cancer patients. "I would never have chosen cancer," she says, "but I recognize the person I've become through it, and that person can offer hope to others in a way I never could before." Michael, the businessman who lost everything, found this perspective at a prayer retreat 6 months after his divorce. "I was so angry at God," he admitted. But during that retreat, a mentor shared this vision of suffering as birth pains, as part of a creative process, and it made complete sense to me. Gradually, Michael began to see his loss, not just as an end, but as a beginning. It was as if I was being forced to let go of a version of myself and my life so that something new could be born, he reflected, and that birth was connected to something bigger happening in the world. Today, Michael leads a non-profit organization that helps small business owners recover from financial crises. What was born from my suffering was an ability to be present for others in their moment of despair, he said. I would never have chosen this path, but now I understand that my experience of loss was being transformed into something greater than I could have imagined. Emma, who lost her brother to suicide, took longer to find meaning in her pain. For almost 2 years I was simply numb, she said. Nothing made sense. It was through a support group for suicide survivors that Emma found this different perspective on suffering. Someone shared this idea that all of creation is in birth pains, she recalled, that my pain wasn't random or meaningless, but part of a greater process of transformation. Slowly, Emma began to notice changes in herself. I was becoming more compassionate, more present, more aware of the fragility of life, she said, and I began to feel that I could use my experience to help others who were going through the same kind of loss. Today, Emma is studying to become a therapist, specializing in grief and trauma. What is being born from my suffering is a vocation, she shared. My brother didn't die so that I could become a therapist. That would be terrible. But through my pain from losing him, a new healing capacity is emerging. These 3 stories illustrate the profound difference this perspective can make. When we see suffering not as punishment or test, but as part of a universal creative process of transformation, we can begin to engage with our pain in a completely new way. This doesn't mean that suffering is good in itself. It's not. Jesus himself wept at Lazarus's tomb and begged in the Garden of Gethsemane for the cup of suffering to be taken from him if possible. Suffering is real, painful, and often devastating. But it is also not the last word. It's not the end of the story. It's part of a birthing process. Painful, yes, but with a defined purpose. So how can we apply this perspective in our own lives? How can it transform our experience of suffering? First, it frees us from unnecessary guilt. If you're going through a moment of intense pain, you don't need to ask yourself, what did I do to deserve this? Or why is God punishing me? Your suffering is not necessarily a direct result of your actions or failures. Second, it gives us a new set of questions to ask. Instead of, why is this happening? We can ask, what is being born through this suffering? How am I being transformed? What new capacity is emerging in me? Third, it connects us to something bigger than ourselves. Our individual suffering is not isolated. It's part of a universal process of transformation that Paul describes as affecting all of creation. This doesn't diminish our personal pain, but it helps us contextualize it as part of a bigger story of renewal. Fourth, it gives us real hope. Not a vague hope that everything will be okay or that there's a plan, but the specific hope that our suffering is connected to a birthing process and that something new and valuable can emerge from it. Psychologist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl wrote in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, suffering ceases to be suffering in some way at the moment it finds a meaning. The biblical perspective we're exploring goes further. It suggests that meaning itself can emerge through the process of suffering, just as new life emerges through the pains of childbirth. Now, let's be clear, this perspective doesn't eliminate the reality of evil in the world, nor does it suggest that God directly causes our suffering. The Bible is clear that much of human suffering is the result of wrong human choices, the brokenness of a fallen world, and the influence of evil spiritual forces. But what this perspective does is reveal that God is continually working to redeem and transform even the worst suffering into something creative and new. As Joseph said to his brothers in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. This is the essence of Christian hope, not that we will never suffer, but that our suffering, however terrible it may be, can become part of a creative process of transformation. Not because suffering itself is good, but because we have a God who specializes in creating life from death, hope from despair, and beauty from ashes. As Henry Nouwen writes, "Our greatest pain often reveals our greatest gift." Not because pain itself is a gift, but because through it something new can be born. A new capacity for compassion, a new depth of character, a new vocation of service. Another passage that illuminates this perspective is found in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed." Peter is not saying that we should rejoice in suffering itself, but that we should rejoice because our suffering connects us to Christ's transformative experience, death followed by resurrection. We participate in his sufferings precisely because we will also participate in his glory, the complete transformation and renewal of all things. This connection between suffering and transformation is a constant theme throughout the Bible. In John chapter 16, verse 21, Jesus uses the same metaphor as Paul. "A woman giving birth to a child has pain because her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world." And in Revelation chapter 21, verse 4, we see the conclusion of this universal birthing process. "He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." This is the ultimate answer to suffering. Not that God ignores it or approves of it, but that he is constantly working to transform it into something new and one day will eliminate it completely. Our current suffering, however intense it may be, is part of a process that will eventually culminate in a world where there will be no more pain. This doesn't make our current suffering less real or painful, but it gives us a perspective that can transform how we experience and respond to it. Let me share the story of one last person, Robert Jensen, a 58-year-old pastor from Seattle. 15 years ago, Robert lost his 17-year-old daughter in a car accident. The pain almost destroyed his marriage, his faith, and his mental health. "I was a pastor," he said, "and suddenly all the answers I had given to other people seemed empty. How could I tell my congregation that God has a plan when I couldn't see any plan in the death of my own daughter?" Robert considered leaving the ministry. For months, he could barely function. "I was angry at God," he admitted. "I blamed him directly." It was during this period that a friend suggested he read Romans chapter 8 with new eyes. He asked me to consider the idea that my suffering wasn't a punishment or a test, but part of something bigger happening, birth pains of a new creation. Initially, Robert resisted. It seemed to diminish the loss of my daughter as if she were just a means to a greater end. But the more he reflected on this perspective, the more he began to see something different. It wasn't that Amy's death had a purpose in the sense of being necessary for some divine plan, he explained. It was that my pain from her loss was connected to something much bigger, the pain of all creation for what has been lost, and the birthing process of something completely new. Gradually, Robert began to feel a transformation within himself. "I was becoming a different person through that terrible pain," he said. "Not better, necessarily, just different. More broken in some ways, but also more real, more authentic, more able to be present with others in their own pain without trying to fix them or offer easy answers." Today, Robert leads a ministry for parents who have lost children. "What was born from my pain was a new ability to be present with others in the midst of their suffering," he shared. "I don't offer them easy answers or explanations. I simply walk with them through the valley as someone who knows the terrain. Robert's story illustrates an essential truth about this transformative perspective on suffering. It doesn't offer us a satisfying intellectual explanation for our pain. It doesn't tell us why this happened to me in a causal sense. Instead, it invites us to a new form of engagement with our suffering, to see it not as the end of the story, but as part of a painful yet creative birthing process. It doesn't tell us why suffering began, but it shows us how it can end in transformation. And perhaps that's precisely what we need, not an explanation that satisfies our mind, but a perspective that can sustain our spirit through the dark valley. Now, perhaps you're thinking, this sounds good in theory, but how can I apply this perspective in the midst of my real pain right now? Let me suggest some practical steps. First, allow yourself to fully feel your pain. Don't try to suppress or deny it. Jesus wept. David lamented. Job shouted his questions to God. The Bible is full of examples of people honestly expressing their pain. Your suffering is real and deserves to be acknowledged. Second, start asking new questions. Instead of, "Why is this happening?" or "How can I get out of this quickly?" Ask, "What is being born through this suffering? How am I being transformed? What new capacity or understanding is emerging in me?" Third, look for signs of new life. In the midst of pain, be attentive to the small evidences of transformation, a moment of unexpected compassion, a new understanding about life, a deeper connection with someone you love, a more authentic experience of faith. Fourth, connect with others who are going through similar suffering. There is healing power in sharing our journey with those who truly understand. As Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, God comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Fifth, practice active hope. Christian hope is not naive optimism that ignores the reality of pain. It's a deep confidence that suffering is not the last word, that through it, something new can and will be born. It's the certainty, as Paul writes in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. This doesn't mean we can clearly see this good in the midst of suffering. Often we can't. As C.S. Lewis wrote, we can see only a little way into the game that God is playing. We cannot see the pattern as a whole, but we can trust that our suffering, however meaningless it may seem, is connected to a greater process of transformation, like the birth pains that precede birth. This is the answer that nobody told you. It's not an answer that eliminates the mystery of suffering or that explains every episode of pain, but it's an answer that can transform how we experience and respond to suffering, seeing it not as divine punishment or an arbitrary test, but as part of a creative process of birthing something new. As the Apostle Paul wrote, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. My friend, I don't know exactly what pain you're carrying today. It might be an illness, like Sarah. It might be a financial or relational loss, like Michael. It might be grief for someone you loved, like Emma and Robert. Whatever you're suffering, I want you to know you're not alone in it. Not just because there are others who share similar pains, but because there is a God who voluntarily entered into our suffering through Jesus Christ. And that God is always working, even now, even in your pain, to transform death into life, despair into hope, and ashes into beauty. Not because suffering itself is good or necessary, but because we have a God whose essential nature is redemptive and creative. So when you ask, why, God? Why do you allow this suffering? Know that the answer is not because I'm testing you, or because you deserve this, or because I have a plan you can't understand. The answer is, I am with you in this suffering, and through it we are together in the process of birthing something new, in you, through you, and in all of creation. This is the answer that nobody told you, and it's an answer that can transform not just your understanding of suffering, but your own journey through it. I want to close with a prayer. Heavenly Father, for each person hearing this message who is going through a moment of pain, bring comfort and perspective. Help us to see our suffering not as the end of the story, but as part of a birthing process. Painful, yes, but with a creative purpose. Give us eyes to perceive what is being born through our pain and strength to continue the journey. And remind us that we never walk alone, that you are with us every step of the way, transforming our pain into something new and beautiful. In the name of Jesus, who knew the deepest suffering and transformed it into the greatest victory, amen.